We're here with the legend, Harry Knowles.
Thank you.
Well, I want to start with a very young childhood memory that you've brought up before that I think is amazing. When you were 2 years old, you had a birthday party, and you had some incredible guests come over, some frightening people. But can you tell us a bit about Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Sure. My dad went to film school with Toby Hooper at the University of Texas, and so they were like classmates. So like, Dad never could get financing together to shoot a film, so Dad would shoot like loops for porn houses in Austin. Those little 16mm things. He'd go to the strip clubs in town and shoot a trailer for the strip club that would play at those places where you had to look in like those old like crank machines to see your porn. Like, it was like the U-porn of the era. It was amazing. And my dad has a 16mm copy of it, which actually went on to influence Tarantino's Kill Bill, because the My Oh My Club was the place in Austin that Dad shot the loop for, that we played to show Tarantino when he threw a QT Fest in Austin, and he thought it was the greatest piece of cinema he'd ever seen in his life. He still like, every time he sees my dad, Quentin's like, dude, you're the master, you know, like, because he saw a pussy blow smoke. It was amazing. And so when I was a kid, Mom and Dad had like a antique shop that turned into a pop culture collectibles place, and all the film people in the Austin area, and there weren't a lot, but there were like beginning people, like Farrah Fawcett at that time was also a classmate of Dad's, and Toby Hooper was, Chewy Hark, father of the Hong Kong film industry.
Wow.
He was a classmate of Dad's, and you know, as well as my mom, because my mom was in these classes too, except she was young and always being crazy as a sorority girl at the time. She was just a wild child that my dad settled down with, you know, but never tamed. And so we're having my birthday party. I remember the birthday cake was Godzilla, and he had bitten off my leg. And I'm sitting there, and all the candles are lit on the cake, and all of a sudden there's a on the front door, and we hear this, and the door opens up, and it's this person that nobody knew who was, because the movie didn't exist yet, right? Like it like, you didn't know what that guy was. It's not Leatherface, it's some guy with a fleshy mask. What is this?
With a chainsaw.
With a chainsaw, but two girls on either side of him, each carrying a basket of body parts.
Oh.
Okay? And I have a little hand at home. This arm is my right hand, and it has a ring on it that was a costume prop that was on the set, and it was sitting up on a mantle in the background of a shot in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and that was the body part I got to choose as a kid out of the thing. And they came over and they gave me a Tyco yellow with a big orange blade, and it had a whole string of BBs that went around it, and it was a pull string chainsaw that you could buy like at the toy stores in the day.
Adorable.
And that's what I cut my birthday cake with, and Leatherface gave that to me to cut my cake because a knife won't do, you know, like, is what he told me. And the story is so, it's one of those things. Have you ever heard a chainsaw inside a house before?
During Halloween is maybe the only time.
Yeah.
And those aren't like chainsaws that I'm imagining.
Right, no, this was a gas-powered, spitting out smoke, it's the chainsaw from the friggin' movie Chainsaw, right? And it filled the living room with smoke, and all the lights started catching the light. I mean, like I could see going past the barrister bookcases that my dad had the comic collections and pulp collections in, and over there's my mother's Hammond organ and a blue Victorian chair and a oriental carpet across the floor, and we had a space heater in the floor that I once kicked off a chair, landed on, and my back sizzled, and my parents played tic-tac-toe on my back with aloe vera. And, you know, like, so it's such a, I had, like, when I grew up, my life became boring. Like as cool as everybody thinks my life is, that everybody knows, the life I had before I had to do anything, when my parents were just artists and you know, film festival, they would do something that would earn money that would take up this much of their time so that they could spend all their time making my world magic. Right? And so that's the environment that made me, and they believed hippily, I know that's not necessarily a word, but hippily, you know, like hippie, L-Y, that it's all about the kid, right? It's about making them believe not just in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny, but everything, right? They refused to tell me Bruce Lee was dead because I worshipped him so much, right? So it wasn't until I was 8 years old that they, son, Bruce Lee's dead. That's a lie! That's impossible! And then I saw Empire Strikes Back, and I totally understood what Luke was feeling when Darth Vader told him something impossible. It was just like, that's impossible, you know? But I had actually acted the scene out about Bruce Lee earlier, you know, because how could Bruce Lee die? He was the most fit, perfect human being in the history of human beings. What do you mean his brain just stopped one day? Your brain can just stop one day? That's an abstract thought for a kid, right? You know, like he was too fit.
Yeah.
And then look what became of me.
Well, I'm kind of curious because that childlike innocence, that Peter Pan quality you've always kept, you have it not just in the way you dress, the way you act, but the collectibles, which is another drop back to your folks, and especially your dad. Can you talk to me about your collection compared to his? Does it ever crosses the mind of, wow, this has been generations of doing this? It's weird. For Dad, it wasn't really a collection. Okay, it was a retail business for a while. And then my mother decided she didn't want to do 9 to 5 at a store. And so they just closed up the store and decided to become artists. And they started doing leather work and bronze work and working out on the drag across the street from the University of Texas, and where all those people do homemade stuff. And we interacted with the college students, and I did leather work and made bracelets and keychains for them, and I made bronze statue that wound up in the Beijing Children's Museum. And right? Like, who has that childhood, right? We'd go to a Renaissance festival. My first job that I got paid for was working with a falconer at the Renaissance Festival. Like having it land on you and everything?
I carried a golden eagle at the age of 7. Right? Who does that? Who does that? My second job at the Renaissance Festival? My job was to find people wearing purple.
Weird.
or gold at the Renaissance Festival. Those are the king's colors. And if you're wearing the king's colors, you go in the stockade and you get your ass beat by the little redhead. And my job was a paid sadist to beat the people that came to the Texas Renaissance Festival mercilessly until the audience started clapping too loud. That's what they told me. And I got $20 for everybody I beat. Good money in the 70s. It's good stuff. After that, I was working with a belly dancing troupe. I helped them get in their costumes.
That's very educational.
It was. As a result, I have a amazing wife, like, and I have fixations that I probably wouldn't have had if I had not worked in the belly dancers troupe. But I was actually part of the act. I'd bring out the sword, and then Carol Channing, she was the one who did the belly dancing troupe. She'd balance the sword on my head and then start jiggling her boobs on either side of my head, as there'd be 2,000 people watching us. And I worked with the Shakespeare unit. I played Puck in Midsummer Night's Dream. I was the merry boy among the merry men in Robin Hood's forest, right? In costume, working with Robin. Robin, I have a message from Maid Marian for you. That was my childhood, right? That's who I was. Then I got divorced and I moved to Seymour, Texas, where if you drive from here to Lubbock, there's a red light in the middle. That's Seymour. You're not seeing more there. You're seeing less. I always thought it should have been called Sealess, Texas. It was just like there's less of it here. And after that, I go back to Austin. I was planning on being a lawyer, going to end up running in politics and become president at the earliest age you could possibly become president. That was my goal, until I realized everyone in politics is an asshole. And I also took a film class because I realized at college, holy wow, you can take a film class. And you had to read your papers in front of the class. And I read my papers, and I got laid. And I realized that my film writing was getting me laid. And I said, fuck the presidency. I'm doing this for the rest of my life, And I didn't know what to do. I was a directionless kid. I was working with Dad, selling collectibles again. We had gone back into that business, got paralyzed, wound up in bed. Decided, I'd read Robert Rodriguez's book, Rebel Without a Crew, and it said, take a look at the tools you have around you and use them, but do it. And I took a look around. I didn't have a camera, couldn't make a movie, I had a computer, and I went online. And in the early text-based days of the internet, it was like the Sahara Desert of movie news. If you went to Variety, once a month they'd update their site. Hollywood Reporter, once a month they'd update their site. And kind of like Ain't It Cool now, but back then, it was a little bit depressing. But this was also a period when the internet didn't have pictures.
Yeah.
It was all text-based, And 96, when we started Ain't It Cool, next year's my 20th anniversary. That's like freaking weird. And I'm 43, and that's just like, wow, that happened, I just don't understand how this stuff happened. Because right now, I'm actually, as I move through life, I have a child perspective. There are many children taller than me in this chair. When I went back to my original elementary school, because my nephew went there, I went through the hallway and it freaked me out because everything was exactly the same. It's because I realized I'm the same friggin' height when I went here. This is amazing. But, doing Ain't It Cool was keeping my mind off the fact that I couldn't move my legs at that time. It was, I wanted to do something that I could do from bed that could take care of my family, because as the older son, I felt responsibility for my family, and getting paralyzed, you sort of feel like everyone has to take care of you now. And that sucks. That's a horrible feeling to have about life. And I felt that way for about 2 days, read Robert's book, and started working on a site, right? Started doing posts, but I couldn't post pictures yet. And so I was in the Rec Arts Movie Current, in the Usenet groups back in the day, and that was amazing. But as I think back on all of it, it is so astonishing. I wasn't the first movie website. The first movie website that I saw was a site up in Canada called Corona Coming Attractions. And it was run by a man by the name of Patrick Sorial. And he was gathering movie rumors, but he was putting them in and like every movie had its own page, and so it would have an update, and all the rumors that were coming in on a movie would be all on that page that day. But there was no commentary, there was no context for anything. It was just whatever the report was. There wasn't a this is how movies stuff goes. And I had grown up reading Famous Monsters of Filmland by Forey Ackerman and Starlog and Variety and Hollywood Reporter. I mean, all those magazines were in my house growing up, and we had them going back into the 19-teens in the house. And I read all that stuff because stuff to read, like it's there. It's what was in my house growing up. And when you have over 150,000 movie items, and you have over about 175,000 comic books, and you're the star of everybody your age, because let's go to Harry's house, like this is the stuff that you're supposed to do. And I was that kid who had Star Wars in the 70s, right? And so what I've tried to do with Ain't It Cool with Harry Knowles, the show that I'm at Dallas VideoFest for, I was, when you look at the opening of the show and you see my dad's long fingernails threading up the projector, what you're seeing are images of my life. That's what I think. My father threading up a projector and showing me movies. That's where the love started, right? The fact that we had over 400 movies in 16 millimeter film with sprocket holes, and every time you watched a movie you had to change your reel at least twice. It was worse than Laserdiscs, except that you heard the clacking of the projector. And because my parents smoked pot because they were hippies, the beam of light was volumetric. You could see it leave the projector and go across the room, and there was something always moving in the light beam. Yet when it hit the screen, it had King Kong. And that was magic, because you could see light travel across the room and become Kong. And kids today, I mean, when I was going to movie theaters in the 70s, everybody was lit up smoking. They were smoking cigarettes. My mom would just chain smoke in movie theaters, and all the seats had ashtrays on the back sides of them that you would put your cigarette out on. And it was like the old way when you flew in airplanes and everybody was smoking, right? I come from that era. The tail end of it, I have memories of it. I can remember my mom literally lighting one off the other all during movies. And that was the way it was, and you could always see the beam of light. To me, it's kind of slightly wrong to not have smoke in a theater. Like, I'm not saying put cigarette smoke and carcinogens. I'm saying let's get a little rock theater, like have some wafting machine that puts that smoke out just so people can see the beam of light, because there's something magic about that beam of light. And so I'm obsessive compulsive on cinema, obviously. And so for me, something that I've always been aggravated about shows about movies is they're not cinematic. They don't use the cinematic narrative language to talk about film, to express film, to just shoot you discussing film, right? Like, to me, when you listen to film music and you shut your eyes, sometimes you see, the actual scene that is for. But I don't know about you, when I listen to John Williams' Star Wars music, I allow my brain to take me on a new Star Wars adventure. That's what that does to me. It's not just the adventures of Luke, Han, and Leia. It's the adventures of Harry Knowles and his dog, Dr. Demento. That's what, we all were that age at some point. When we had Han's blaster as a kid, we had our own adventures. Yeah. Right? Why do we stop when we become grown-ups? Because it's time to be boring, kids. Let's get miserable and have my liver blow up. Like that. That's sort of what the world tells you. But when you're sitting there and you're thinking about all this stuff, I remember when I was creating the site and Ain't It Cool, the whole thing came up. I was paralyzed at the time. I was coming off a Broken Arrow. That was the last movie I had seen in a theater. before the accident, and I was sitting there and I was like trying to come up with it. I had like Harry's Movie Emporium was one of my ideas, and I was just like, that's ass. like it's just, and it feels so egotistical, right? To have your name and then and Dad was like, what do you mean? And it was like, Jay's 20th Century Esoterica is the name of my business. I said, yeah, but that's to you, it's like, it's something else. I said, I want something that kind of has like call letters and stuff. And he's like, what do you mean? And I go like, well, like, KRU or KBVO or KFAA, or I was on that network earlier today. It's so weird being on actual local broadcast news. That guy loved me. It was so bizarre, or at least that's what the words on the screen told him to say. But it's so weird to exist in this side of the. I'm usually so tell me what you think, like here I am being like interviewed and being like, this is so Warhol, it's so bizarre.
But you say that, but you've been interviewed by so many people, though.
I'm the reporter that crossed the line.
Yeah.
And I don't, when I'm on live television and somebody says, I'm here with Harry Knowles. He's the man who made Talking About Movies cool. Like, really? Is that what you think? That's what I did? And then I think about it, and you think, well, Roger Ebert was cooler after he was with me. like if you think about it, when he created RogerEbert.com, that was, I told him to create his own site, because after I wrote that X-rated Blade 2 review of mine, which if you've been reading since 98, you obviously must know how to go down on a woman well, because you read my Blade 2 review. And I've had many women that just wanted to see if that's how I do it, and they love me, and it's when Roger read that review, he called me up. He says, this is the only review in the entire history of reviews I've ever read that I'm jealous of. He goes, I wish I had written it. He says, because the combination between an incredibly tensely cut suspense scene and going down on a woman, I totally see the metaphor, right? Because at that point, just like when they are down on you, you are in control. And it's about peaks and valleys, and that's what a great cinematic suspense filmmaker will create. And it's all about taking those metaphors in life and going with. And Roger says, I've written for a family newspaper my own life. I've never been able to just write what I honestly felt. And I said, that's why you need to create a website. For one, you need to archive all that stuff. You own your reviews, don't you? He says, yeah. Create a website, man. Like, archive all that stuff, And he was just like, but wouldn't they get mad? I was like, do you realize if you create your own website of Roger Ebert reviews, it will be bigger than the Chicago's Tribune?
Yeah, Tribune.
Yeah, he was Tribune. Sometimes was...
No, he was Sun-Times. That's right.
Siskel was Tribune. Yeah. That's what I thought. Anyway, so the thing is Roger was he was that guy who plucked me out of anonymity. I had stories in Time Magazine, all the magazines. The first year that I was in business, I had over 1,700 interviews that were dispersed. Like, it was an explosion. It was like, the way they were talking about me was the most grotesque weirdness. They were like, the boy who could destroy Hollywood. It's like, I love movies. I don't want to destroy it. Stop making shit. That's all I want you to do. Make good superhero movies. It can be done. You will make more money than you will ever think was humanly possible in cinematic history if you make good superhero movies. Right? That's all you got to do. Make a good superhero movie. It will, and I was saying this in 1996, 97, 98. Kevin Feige and these guys tell me that reading that stuff was what inspired them to do what they've done. When you talk to Thomas Tull at Legendary, at the time I was doing Ain't It Cool, he had created a brilliant algorithm that allowed crowdsourcing of great funds of money for investors and made billions of dollars. I'm so worthless. But anyway, he was doing that. And so he became a multi-billionaire who grew up in a trailer reading comic books, going to school to study finance because that's the thing he knew he could learn. He managed to raise great tons of money, and he was reading Ain't It Cool? And the first story about him appeared in the Wall Street Journal, and I was on the cover. Why would I ever be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal? I don't have money. You're supposed to have money if you're on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. Like, I have an engraving of me on the Wall Street Journal. It's amazing. Like, my life is... Al Hirschfeld drew me. You've got to be kidding me. He was drawing people in the 30s and 20s, like all the top Hollywood talent, and he drew me for like the New Yorker. Like, one line, he hid his daughter's name in my hair. Like, that's so cool, you know? So, you know, when I'm creating a show, and what I'm trying to do with the PBS thing is, when Gene and Roger started out, it was one station in Chicago, and they never dreamed it could get bigger. Well, because it did, I had that dream. And when we were doing the Kickstarter, and a friend from KRU came over and says, you know, Harry, he says, if you can clean up your mouth, I could totally get you on KRU. And I was like, you think so? He says, dude, your show looks better than almost anything on PBS, like just from a visual standpoint, right? You know, and I was like, so I can't cuss? The one thing Roger was bitter about was that he couldn't cuss. Like, that's, you know, angry, you know, and so when I started out, and we started to do the Kickstarter, and it was about doing more of the YouTube shows, and the negative feedback sort of came in, and it was like, really, you need $100,000 to do a YouTube show? And I was like, well, did you see our show, man? I mean, we're like, you know, I visualized in CG in a beautiful manner the sound of music transporting through the air coming out of my memory, right? Nobody'd ever done that before. It looks amazing in that episode of the YouTube show, right? You know, and it was creating the imagination of how this stuff affects us in a cinematic way that nobody had ever seen, as a fan trying to create something he'd never seen before, not just emulate what had come before.
Well, I'm curious then, like, when you were sculpting the way the show would look, and you had everything kind of written out, like,
oh, there was no writing out.
This is all just. So where did you come up with, like, I don't know, the you know, like putting their heads in the globes, or the time machine element of them coming in, or the fact that you'd be talking about something and you get interrupted and there's this moment?
Let me tell you, when I started the show, the one thing is I had a personal paycheck from Nerdist that was, it's missed. It was pretty cool. And one of the things I did was, like, 1 out of every 4 paychecks I would use to just buy cool stuff that I felt could help enhance the show. And that I would love to have, because, like, my retirement plan, like, what I would love to, like, end game, although I never plan to retire, but it's always good to have a retirement plan. I mean, what if I end up in a wheelchair or something? How am I going to continue to do what I do? Anyway, so I want to have a place. There's a film museum of the collectibles. I've still got over 100,000 movie posters, got over 100,000 comic books still, like, you know, and that's all the ancient stuff, you know, from ancient years ago. And I don't want to sell it. because nobody has these collections anymore. Like, as a dealer who knows the business, I mean, I know there are collections out there. I still know some of these people, but God, they're dying all the time. Yeah. And you see, they're like the guy who the Heritage auction that had all these amazing posters recently, and they had 3 catalogs that were this thick. That guy'd been buying from me for years. Like, I cried when I saw that his collection was up, because I'd had endless conversations with him from that age. Right? Now, think about that. When I was a little boy, I was having conversations about cinema with people who had been collecting movie paper since the 30s. Right? And they had read press books, and they could tell stories. And Dad told me if I wanted to tell stories, read all the press books. Mm. Right? Learn the history of cinema. You know, that's important, you know. And when I started to do the show, like the whole look of the basement, like, we got told that there was a space at Highland Mall in Austin, which was a defunct mall, and there used to be a Lane Bryant's, like, you know, sort of roomy women's clothes, and I mean, more mirrors than that friggin' end sequence of Enter the Dragon. Like, I mean, talk about feeling vain. You walk into that place empty, and you just go over to a mirror section, and it's like, you know, like you start going Bruce Lee on yourself, you know. And I go in, and there was this weird hole in the ceiling, and I looked at the hole, and I said, that's where the teleporter goes. and they go, why do you need a teleporter? I said, well, in case we need to do an on location. And I'm going to have a Muppet. And they said, what do you mean you're going to have a Muppet? I said, well, Jim Henson teamed up with Nerdist for the show, so I get a Muppet. The whole reason I'm doing the show is because I'm supposed to get a Muppet, and they never gave me my Muppet. Still angry about that. Somewhere, Harry Knowles is prisoner on a rod in the Henson Library of Muppets, and he's like going, I want to go back there. You're not going to use it again.
You're never going to get it.
I'm never going to get it. I want it so bad. It's the whole reason I did the show, because I wanted a Muppet of me made by the Henson people. And that it exists at all, that it was in the first season is amazing. But once Nerdist didn't want to continue to do the show, our relationship with Henson went with them because they had teamed up. And I was heartbroken. But at the same time, I fell in love with my crew. I fell in love with the thing. When I would go to do the show, okay, let me finish telling you about the show. So I was there, I said, over here, we're only going to have a budget to sort of do 2 walls.
Okay.
So it's going to be a corner. But we got this column. We can decorate the column, and then we can bring furniture and other extra stuff.
You've always got the backdrop too.
Yeah,
like the posters, for instance.
The posters just they were whatever was right for the show.
Yeah,
and so Brett never knew really even the subject matter of a show. And I would show up like right when they're very first starting up, setting everything up. And while they were doing that, I would be going through posters. And Dad took about, 10,000 posters down to the location, because we had this like 12,000 square foot Lane Bryant that was ours. This is ours. Had a big rainbow curtain across the front of it because it was like used for the gay and lesbian garage sale. It was like, I love the energy of this place. It's great. Like, I love being in a women's store doing my basement show about movies. That's just so weird, And I said, boiler goes over there. And they said, what is a boiler? And I said, you got some paper, and I drew Boiler, drew his face, did all the rivets and everything, and said, Suzette, can you make this and make the mouth move? And I said, there has to be something that diffuses the red light from behind it that also hides the puppeteer. And she's like, okay, yeah, no problem. And I said, I want the eyes to be like green, and I want the mouth to be red. She says, why green? Because he has envious eyes. He can't ever go to a movie theater. And yet he lives with a guy who can only talk about movies that he can only see when it comes out on home video. And that's why Boiler's mad all the time. And that was a story that I just made up on the fly. right? You know, and I said he's got things coming out of him. But if you take a look at Will Vinton's Closed Monday, which was nominated for an Academy Award, there's a machine that is the spirit of what Boiler was supposed to be in there.
No.
The machine that transforms and turns into all that stuff. Originally, Boiler, like if I had the budget, Boiler's arm, like those dreads of that go up, those were supposed to come down and he'd pick himself up and move and stuff. Like it's, for me, all that the show has been is the cheap basement show. Like, we haven't even touched on what we want to do. I mean, we've never really got to make the cave. I mean, we did an animated one for the end of the Malton episode, which was the final episode of this season, and that's neat. It's really cool, very eclectic. You know, it's like Austin's Chewy's Tex-Mex meets Pee-wee Playhouse meets the Feebles, you know, like, and it was fun, but it's still not what I meant. To me, the cave is always in like Play-Doh, you know, like it's that place that you go to find everything that you love, that you cherish, that you keep true to yourself, and to me, that's cinema. And in the cave, that's why I always had like guests like Bill Tippett go off into the cave and stuff, or Douglas Trumbull went off into the cave. Like the guests that went off into the cave were the visionaries. They're the magic men, the people that brought the images that are in our imaginations to life. And to me, that's what the cave is supposed to be. And I was going to have a cave, and that's where we were going to do round tables, where we'd have like 6 or 7 guests, and we'd have an audience that would come, and there'd be a screen behind it, and the screen would be triangular, because nobody has a triangular screen except in This Island Earth, right? And I love This Island Earth, and I have always been waiting for my upside down triangle screen, right? You know, because I want an interocitor on my set, right? You know, like I want to be able to do teleconferencing where I can shoot people with lasers. You know, that just seems appropriate. Like we need to start having telecommunications where you can kill the person on the other line. You know, that's just, there are times where that's so necessary. You know those calls. You know,
you just want to end it.
Like just, you know, like zap, smoke. You know, like.
Do you mind if I ask then? How do you? Okay, when you're coming up with like what guests to bring in, how did you decide specifically who to bring in? How did
versus
that happen?
Who comes in the globe and that sort of stuff? It's budget. It's can they get to Austin on their own dime?
Okay.
like because our show never had a travel budget, right? I mean, like it's great. Like you'll have a show where when events are going on, y'all go out and capture those people, and I can totally do that. I mean, South by Southwest, I can go and interview a whole bunch of people, put them in the Magic Globe, give them a presentation unlike anything they've done. I mean, like, if you saw the promo that IMAX released of Joseph Gordon-Levitt on the show, he thought it was so cool that his head would be in a crystal ball instead of a square right here, right? You know, like, everybody does that, right? You know? And it's like, it's cinema. You can make it whatever you want. It could be magic mirror on the wall. Can you bring somebody here now? You know, like, and then somebody shows up in the magic, put up a face. You know,
that's why you have editing.
Exactly. And like when I was creating the show, like the music stuff, I put an old ear horn from the 19-teens in my ear, and I would imagine the music, and then I would have my eyes follow it around the room, and I told the VFX guy, follow my eyes and make the ripples, right? And I know that's absurdly insane, but Brian Bean did it. He was our VFX guy in the first season.
And
it looks amazing. It really, and it feels magic because you're hearing Bernard Herrmann, and the music is directing the animation, right? And because I know the themes I was talking about, I was actually humming the bars on set as we were doing it, so they would know what pieces of music to put in there. Right? Like, that's the kind of geek I am, right? You know, I'm the sort of person that when I tell stories, I do voices. You know, like I always done that. Like when I was a kid, I wanted to grow up to do cartoon characters, right? You know, oh, hey everybody, you know, like, you know, you know, like I love being able to do Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. As a kid, that means they're your buddies, right? You know, it's weird. I was always a weird kid, man, but always popular. Like I was always the fat kid people loved, you know. And growing up, I always saw being fat as like this negative thing, but it was my existence. So I'm going to own it, right? You know. And so I took public speaking. I took theater classes. People always ask me, like, what did you go to college to major in? And I said, I wanted to be famous. And I wanted to be a character actor. That's why I'm a character, right? That's what I want to do. I actually got a part in a movie coming out next year, that I'm supposed to shoot next year, where I get to play a grumpy a Hollywood tour guide, bus driver type, and I'm going to be, like, in a scene opposite David Arquette. And yeah, it's weird. They're paying me good money. It's bizarre. Like they were like, would you be willing to do that? Never had to read for them, right? Like, and they said, and you know, if you can come up with better dialogue for the grumpy tour guide guy, you're more welcome to go for it. And I'm like, I can riff on this, you know, like, it's fun. I mean, it's weird for me playing grumpy because I'm always such a cheerful person, but, you know, I'll just channel my grandpa, you know, like, it's just like, boy, oh boy, I tell you, you know, like, it'll be great, you know, it'll be a lot of fun.
Is it fascinating then, because I love the part that you're just saying that you don't have to change who you are to be everything you've been able to do.
Something like this,
that's power. What does that feel like? It's because so many other like famous people have to change who they are. They've got to change the way they look. They've got to do this to become famous. You are as you
I'm
are,
Harry, and
look
I'm
at
Harry.
you now.
No, I mean, and for a lot of people, I am the Harry.
Yeah.
You know, that's bizarre. People legitimately ask if Beyonce is related to me. It's so weird. So weird.
It's close. I see the resemblance.
Well, it's not about that. We're in a modern world.
Yeah.
You know, like who knows, right? You know, I mean, it's a legitimate question, but it's just so odd, right? You know, like, because I'm just like, I look at Beyonce and like everybody else is like, you know, like, I'm angry that her last name is Knowles. It's like she's stepping on my gig, man. I was famous before her.
Long before her, right?
She's
a Texan, though. Maybe that's the connection.
But the thing is when I was a kid, the person who the actor in film history that said, you know what, you could become famous, was a guy named Patrick Knowles, who was in The Adventures of Robin Hood as Will Scarlet, and he also played the friend of the Wolfman, and Frankenstein versus the Wolfman, and you know, and I had the insert for Frankenstein. Well, my dad still has the insert for Frankenstein meets the Wolfman at his house, and you see Patrick Knowles' name on it, and so you look at a poster that says Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. It's one of the greatest movies of all time, right? You know, all this mashup stuff that we're doing now. Old school, man. All began with that, right? That's where it started. Although there was this obscure Western called Robin Hood of the Pecos that was a Gene Autry thing that had all the other B-Western movie stars at the time, and they all worked together to save all the Christmas trees from being destroyed by a gang of evil people that want to destroy all the Douglas fir trees in the county so that there's no Christmas. It's the greatest movie of all time, and nobody knows it. You know, like it's the mashup. All the Rocky Lane, Whip Wilson, all these people sort of show up and come together to save Christmas. It's great, one of the greatest Christmas movies of all time. And you sit there and you think about this stuff, and you just realize everyone talks about how the world is so different now, and we're trying to create interrelated movie universes, and that's not what movies were supposed to. What are you talking about? That's how it always has been, right? They always did that stuff. There were promo things that would show Charlie Chan and Sherlock Holmes and Mr. Moto together, like on like variety radio shows, and they would like all act as though they were in a mission together. And there's like, we think we've invented something called fanfic, but no, this stuff has been around, and it was all done much more literately in the past. I mean, it is interesting to like study the history. Like, you read fan journals from the 1940s about film, it's not horribly different. It's people dreaming about who these movie stars are and what their characters are. And, for me, I feel watching the movie is just the beginning. Afterwards, think about the ideas the film gave you. Play. Allow it to take root in your mind. Dad always said, learn from the characters in movies so you don't repeat their mistakes. Because there's a lot of tragedy in cinema.
Yeah.
Right? One of the things you learn about, don't get in gunfights. I'm a big target, I'm just saying, I'm a big target, and I'm the redhead, right? They're gonna see me. My whole life, they said, Harry, you had your hand raised? No, I didn't. I have red hair, like, stop picking me. I went to the, it's like the League of American Nations or something. It's the big, like, all the Latin American countries have this organization that's in Washington. I can't remember the name of it now, because this is like, I was 16 at the time. And I got chosen for this National Young Leadership Society thing, and I got elected president of the group. It was amazing. It was back when I thought I could become president. I was like, oh yeah, man, I went to Washington, D.C., got elected by my peers. I was the first American child let into the Soviet embassy.
What?
Yeah. I had to go into the Soviet embassy and talk to the ambassador. This was before Gorbachev declared glasnost, right? This is when it was the friggin' Soviet Union, right? Like real CCCP shit, right? It was the real thing. And I go in, and I was really wanting to go to Moscow State University, because I had always heard that when the Russians captured Berlin, that they took Hitler's film library. And in Hitler's film library, Hitler's favorite film was King Kong, and he had an original 1933 print. It could have the Lost Spider Pit scene.
Wow.
I have been hunting for that scene my entire life. And if it's anywhere, it's at Moscow State University, where Hitler's film archive is stored still to today. Somebody find that print.
In a million years, I never thought we'd go there. That's amazing.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, so I go, and the whole reason I went to the Soviet embassy was because the group, they had to elect one kid, and if one kid could convince the Soviet ambassador that we were coming in with open minds, because it was still, I mean, it is the very tail end of the Cold War, right? And I go in, and I was nothing but fascinated about Moscow and St. Petersburg. Like, my entire life, Dad always taught me, the problem is hating your enemy. The art of war teaches you to love your enemy. Because if you don't love your enemy, you'll never understand them. Right? Wow. And so, I mean, hey man, I was raised by hippies. I was wearing a Buddha shirt yesterday, and all that nightmare, I was like, Buddha, like, Buddha, stay calm, just be centered.
Is it weird though, you've become Buddha to so many people?
Yeah, well, I mean, my sister's been calling me, when she was a kid, she couldn't say the word brother, so she always called me Bubba, and I thought that was so redneck, and so I said, call me Buddha, right, because it sounds better than Bubba, right, and so my sister's been calling me Buddha forever, and the reason is because I was always very centered about, don't freak out, calm down, step by step. What do you do to solve the thing that's freaking you out? Just be chill, right? Yelling, screaming, throwing stuff, that's destructive. That is chaos. You don't get centered by that. You get exhausted, and then you can think about your problems. Or you can just think about them, you know? And to me, that is how I mean, it's just my philosophy, right? You know, when I think of Ain't It Cool, what I was creating, I mean, do you realize, I mean, how old are you?
32.
32. So you don't really remember before the internet.
No.
Because I've been doing this 19 years, which means I started when you were 13. And, you know, when you think about before the internet, how did fans organize? Comic conventions. They would go to comic conventions. Why did Star Trek come back from the dead? Because a woman named B.J. Trimble, who was a friend of my family. Like, the whole reason I was a little kid on the set of Flesh Gordon, in the rocket ships of Flesh Gordon, this tall, was because B.J. Trimble was one of the costume and makeup people on Flesh Gordon. And it was a whole bunch of fan people that met at conventions that said, we should make a porno. And they made a softcore one. It wasn't hardcore, right? You know, but it was still amazing. It's still one of my favorite films of all time. I saw it when I was a little kid because I want to see Flash Gordon. I love Flash Gordon. And there was no color Flash Gordon movie at that time, right? The 70s, right? And B.J. Trimble saved Star Trek because she went to every fan convention around the country and gathered signatures. And she got like 50,000 signatures that she took to Paramount.
Wow.
And Paramount was like, wow, there's an audience out there that wants this. Because if these 50,000 people are there, every signature represents 10,000 people that you've never discovered the list. So that's, what is that? That's like 5 million people or something, you know, like it's a lot of people, you know, or maybe 50 million people, you know, is like loving Star Trek. And that was there. What I wanted to do was I wanted people to know that films are happening right now, right? Because if you think about it, Entertainment Tonight, 2 weeks before a movie gets released, does a report saying, hey, we're live from the set of name the movie. And I always like, you liar, you were on that set months ago. That movie's coming out in 2 weeks. How could you possibly? Like, it always got me angry, right? Why not do it live from the set, right? So what did I do? I go to New Zealand. I'm on the set of Lord of the Rings. The whole world doesn't know the movie's going to be any good. Nobody had ever seen it. So I start writing. And I start writing not only what I saw on set, but I would talk to the artists and say, what am I missing here? All this blank spot. I see these lights here. If the camera were to do this, what is that? And they would describe it to me. And I would write. Because that's what the movie was going to be. What am I missing that my eyes can't see right now?
Wow.
Right? And don't describe it in and a bunch of silicon machines will be creating robotic people moving against one another. You know, it's like, no. I'm going to talk about how there's an army of 500,000 Uruk-hai and, you know, like really conjure the imagination, because that's what all these people you see busting their ass making a movie are trying to do. And too many people go to sets and go, it was boring. It's boring on set. They're creating your imagination and you're bored? How is that possibly boring? Right? Like, you go hang out with a sound guy. That sound guy has heard an amazing amount of stories. Right? How many sets? You know, the first international set that I ever went to was The Mummy.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Stephen Sommers' The Mummy.
Yeah.
And that's where I met Jim Jacks, really fantastic producer. Did Tombstone, Raising Arizona, you know, The Gift, you know, a whole bunch of stuff with Sam Raimi. I mean, just guy, I learned so much from him. He was like my partner. We were going to make a whole bunch of movies, but he died before we could make any of them. But I met him on the set, and he found me because, like, if you've ever gone to a junket set visit, they lead you around, and there's like this publicist like, here, talk to this person, here, talk to this person, and you're just like, man, you're just going to get the same story that everybody else who's recording the exact same conversation is doing. That's not journalism. That's like, Hollywood cracker. You know, I mean, like that's puppetry. You know, it is manipulation. And so I just wandered off from the group, and I found this construction guy, and he was like telling other people what to do. And it turns out he was the master carpenter on The Mummy. And I said, so I look at this all looks really solid. You ever regret not building things that are going to last? I mean, I just thought that's a natural conversation for talking to a master carpenter, because he is making stuff that's just going to get torn down.
Yeah.
Right? It's all going to get thrown out. That wood, those trees that gave their lives to the set will not be reused. They will be destroyed and turned into pulp for paper, which we don't need anymore. It's like, build the sets. Let people live in them. Let's continue to create a fantasy world out of every movie set that ever gets made, right? This stuff is amazing. Anyway, so I asked him, he says, you know why? He says, I'm building pyramids. He says, I get to build Egyptian boats. If I were a carpenter working in a subdivision, being in charge of building the glass towers we have here in Dallas, I'd never get to build something of the Victorian era. He says, I built the space wheel for Kubrick.
Wow.
For Dave to jog in. And he says, we had it counterbalanced so well that the whole thing turned based on his feet jogging. Wow. It was literally a gerbil wheel, right? It's like, but enormous. It wouldn't fit in this room. Okay, the whole set, upside down, everything. They had to have a bar that rotated in that had guys sitting on it with a camera to follow him through that shot.
That's crazy.
Because their motion on the thing would affect the speed of the wheel. So it had to be nothing but Dave, right? You built a space wheel that, oh my, not worthy. It was cool. And Jim comes up and he says, so Harry, you decided to wander away from the rest of the press, eh? He says, what are you getting out of this guy? I said, did you know he built the space wheel for Kubrick in 2001? And he goes, you built the space wheel for Kubrick in 2001? And he'd realized, Harry, he says, you're too good for these other reporters. He says, you found that story on this set. He says, why don't you come back to my office? I want to show you some stuff. And he takes me into his office. And he's the producer of the friggin' film. He's got all the dailies for the film on videotape in his office. And he says, Harry, here's my bar. There's all the dailies for the film. You can try to do whatever you want to in this room. I'm just going to leave you here for about 3 hours. I said, okay. So I started power watching dailies for the film. I went to his computer, emailed every script he had in it to my account at home. I drank his booze, and he comes back, and I'm still sending scripts to myself, drinking his booze, fast forwarding through the boring parts of the dailies. And he goes, Harry, what? He says, I've done this with maybe 5 journalists in my life. You have done more. He says, how many tapes you go through? Because all the tapes, none of them were put back in their cases. They were laying all over the floor. I would jerking that stuff, right? It's like, where's the good monster stuff, right? It's like, not here. It's at IOM. Like, oh man, So I was like going, anyway. And so Jim decided to hang out with me. He drove me personally back to the hotel in London. Told me stories about Tombstone and how he wishes the movie were as good as it was supposed to be. And I'm like, dude, the movie's amazing. What are you talking about? And he's just like, oh man, George Cosmatos just ruined it and blah, 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 blah. Kevin Jarre had this epic thing. It was going to happen. Kurt Russell's so pissed off. It was like all this epic stuff. And I was just like, wow, the producer of Tombstone isn't happy with Tombstone. That's so weird. And so I spent the next 13 years of our friendship convincing him that Tombstone is a fucking awesome movie, man, and you need to own up to it. And over the time, he finally acknowledged that he had made a great movie, right? That people truly love. And that's what I feel. I mean, journalists don't do that, right? They go to these sets and they get fed.
They all ask the same questions.
They all ask the same questions. They all do the same things. You know, I see Matthew Modine, and I ask him about Oliver
Wood.
Oliver Reed. That's great actor.
But you can't get into the full story.
No, I won't go into. He actually, as he was leaving, he says, "Don't tell anybody that story on air." And I said, "Matthew, just to friends that are drunk." He says, "All right." He says, "But you have to swear them secrecy." I said, "Pinky swears." And he goes, "All right." Yeah, you earn the respect of a guy that way, right? Like, my thing is I'm not in this for a brief story. I mean, this story, if I were to go home, write this story, it would be the most read story on the internet tomorrow.
This is coming from a guy who wrote
stories that have done that.
Yeah.
Like, I know those stories.
Yeah.
Right? This is one of those stories. It's epic. Like, and I had always heard Rennie Harlin's version of the story. And Rennie Harlin's version, like much of Rennie Harlin, ain't as good as the actors in his films. You know, like, and Matthew Modine's version of the story that would happen in this film, breathtaking. Everything, like, Oliver Reed was one of the get drunk with Peter O'Toole and get in barroom fights in England with, you know, working class men, you know, because that's what Hemingway and Steinbeck would do. That's what men do. We fight, we feel stuff, right? You know, and, you know, as a matter of fact, Matthew Modine says when he met Oliver Reed, first thing he did was sock him in the jaw. that Oliver Reed socked him in the jaw, and he says, "Oliver, why did you do that? I'm your actor. I'm in your movie with you." And he says, "You're a spy." That's great. I love that stuff. You know, it's the character of the business. And, you know, I mean, my dad, his best friend growing up in high school, wound up writing jingles, and he wrote a couple that, you know. Okay, I can't remember him off the top of my head right now, sadly. But his name was Johnny Cunningham, and he went out to Hollywood. And after he sold his first jingle, he bought a pink convertible Cadillac and got all the pussy. And this is a story my dad told me. Always like, "I need a pink convertible Cadillac." Like, no, I'll just talk movies better than anybody, and I'll fascinate them with bullshit. It'll be great, you know. And then it was like, "What do you mean? I have access to real stories. I don't have to bullshit anymore. It's amazing, you know." And, you know, when you have a chance to talk to people as a journalist, it's about listening. You know, you're doing a really good job here, because you allow, when you get somebody who can tell stories, let them tell stories. Yeah. That is always the rule. You know, and it's so rare that you actually get somebody that will run with it. You know, and as a journalist, I know that it sucks a lot sometimes when you're opposite the mic and you're like, "So, tell me a story about working on this movie." "It was fun." That's not a story. You know, like, you know, but you never say, "That's not a story." You just do the next question, like, "What was it like to work with this person?" And they're like, "He was just the most pleasant person I've ever known." You know, like, you're useless to me, right? What I got out of Matthew was a story at the end of a day from one guy to another who he saw at Filmmaker instead of press. And that's the reason why I have to honor what he said, because I was a filmmaker. I wasn't press at that exchange. So it's a personal story, not a public one, right? You know, it's ethics. It's something that we've missed. And when you do that and you do it right, and you realize I'm not in this for the short run, I'm in this for the rest of my life. And it's about not betraying the trust of the subjects you have. You know, that's a rule. Like if you get the really hot thing where, you know, like sure, if somebody says, you know, hey, Simon Pegg's in Star Wars, right? I knew that. The day he left set, we wrote to each other and talked about it. And he says, you can't tell anybody. And he didn't tell me what his scene was, but I know, because I'm Harry Knowles. It's what I do, you know? It's Star Wars. There's nothing I don't know. I know everything from the first shot to the last shot. I know every lens used in the movie. I know every action of every scene of the movie. I know none of the dialogue. I love that. Love that.
When this camera stops, we'll be talking much more.
Yeah.
So I've got to ask then, how do you do this all from Austin, Texas? This doesn't happen out of Hollywood. This doesn't happen out of New York. You've gone to London millions of times. This is Austin bread and butter.
Yeah.
You've been one of the main figures who've made Austin into this mystical place.
It does. Yeah.
What the hell is going on down south of us that is so damn magical?
I mean, honestly, it's me and Tim. I mean, like
Tim League.
Tim League of the Alamo Drafthouse. Like, when we are like, you know who Jan and Zan are, the Wonder Twins? Activate, right? And I'm the ice, the cool one. And he turns into all these animal spirits and parties like them. Like, it's just amazing to watch Tim League unleashed, right? You know, that does make him Jan and me Zan, but I'm fine with that. I'm still the guy who can become a bucket of water, you know, like that's lame. I like all the ice stuff he could become. I thought all that stuff was great, but I liked it when he would become ice and she would become a polar bear, right? Like, what's a polar bear gonna do? Like, roar. You know, anyway, I love Super Friends. Although Marv was like my fave. I like that kid before Jan and Zan. Those guys were awesome. But I mean, the main reason, what it is like, when I got Mel Gibson to bring Passion of the Christ to Button-Umathon.
Yeah.
It was Button-Umathon 5. We had the premiere of Return of the King. We had the premiere of Old Boy months before it played at Cannes, where it world premiered. You know, and right after Undead, the zombie movie, and after it was Teenage Mother, a zombie movie, and then Passion of the Christ. I thought it was appropriate. No, it was like a teenage mother, a zombie, Christ. You know, like Mel Gibson's Christ. Right? You know, it's gonna be brutal,
bloody.
Yeah, it's gonna be. The guy's gonna get torn up, man. And he refused to play it for the Pope. And when got reported that he turned the Pope down, I had the thought, and it's because. Why does UT play Rice? Because it's hard, right? Kennedy told us to do things that were hard. And when you think about that, I don't know what's not possible until I failed, right? Like, or succeeded. And nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? These are like common terms. So I had no connection to Mel Gibson at all. I cold called Icon Productions. Said, hey, I'm Harry Knowles. I would like to play Passion of the Christ at my film festival, Button-Umathon. And they said, we'll pass it along. And then one day, somebody, because I was Harry Knowles, I was in the media constantly. At that, I mean, and it's such a foundation. I mean, Matthew Modine recognized me, right? You know, like we never met, but he recognized me, you know, and he was like, how do I know you again? And I'm like, ain't it cool? He says, oh, yeah, you're Harry. Like, So weird when famous people recognize you, and it might be because I've been doing it for 19 years, but I've never done this to Matthew Modine. Like, I've never put a mic in his face, never talked to him anywhere, never done a junket with Matthew Modine, like never seen him until here, and I had to ask him about Oliver Reed. And I told somebody earlier, if I see him, I'm asking about Oliver Reed. Like, I know stories are awesome there. And when I approached Mel and he got the phone call, I knew Mel has an ego of an artist, okay, which is emboldened, because as an artist you try to create things nobody has seen before, and that is egotistical, just basically, right? To try to show people something they've never seen before. That's egotistical, that you think you could
slightly
do that. Yeah. I mean, it's huge if you really think about it. Every director that ever makes a movie has to have that level of ego, because you have to believe in it so much that everybody invests in what you believe in. And you really have not much to show early on to get that money, to be able to develop that thing nobody's ever seen before. And so I tell Mel, I say, look, this is a festival where it's about half vintage films, half new films. I said, but everybody and their brother knows that Return of the King is probably going to play. And I said, at least of the audience. I said, not the rest of the world, because they've kept it secret.
Yep.
Right? It never got announced that Fellowship of the Ring played, Two Towers didn't get played, because I made $100,000 advertising bet with New Line that I could keep it quiet.
Wow.
Okay? They could have $100,000 of free advertising on Ain't It Cool if it gets out, and it didn't get out. And that's the sort of trust I had with the audience, okay? And I was willing to sacrifice $100,000 of revenue, and websites don't make a lot of money. That'd be like 3 years of free ads for New Line, and they had all these Lord of the Rings movies, so they were like, free ads, man. Never broke. They didn't break it themselves. It was a personal bet between me and Bob Shea. And so I tell Mel, I said, I'll understand if you don't want to play, because Return of the King's going to play about the middle of the festival, and there's not a lot of films that want to really follow that. And he says, my movie can play after any movie. And I told him, I said, look, Peter Jackson's coming. I said, I'm going to have him show up at the end of his movie, do a Q&A, and then he's going to send the audience. Then I'm going to show him one of his top 5 favorite movies that he's never seen projected before. Wow. And we're bringing in a band to play with it, and it's Buster Keaton's The General and 35 millimeter with a band where there's going to be a guy playing a saw, right? And they're going to play nothing but like old timey tunes that would have gone with The South Rises Again, which is what The General is, and and he says, oh man, he says, this thing sounds so great. I said, you have to understand, I was raised in the upstairs by my hippie parents. I could always see the beam of light coming out onto a screen that was just a sheet hanging from the ceiling that was weighted down by a bar on the bottom of the floor. He says, and I said, all the first movies I remember seeing were on that screen. You could always see the light because of all the pot smoke in the room. He says, Harry, that's just like me in college in Australia. He says, I remember watching movies on a sheet and the pot smoke in the room, and and he was just like, I have to do this festival. Holy shit, I landed Mel Gibson. Right? And it was just having an honest, appealing to the geek in him, daring him to do it, sort of challenging his ego to allow his film to play last. And his film stole the publicity of the thing, because nobody in America, other than religious groups, had ever seen the movie. And this was the first non-secular audience that saw the film. And when he came out, his hands were trembling, because he didn't know what a bunch of godless geeks were going to think about a movie about Christ that gets torn to shreds. But coming after a zombie film certainly didn't hurt, like I had him there for the gore factor, like it's like geeks can associate with any movie. Doesn't matter if they believe or not, right? It's all fantasy to us, I mean, really,
I think we could go all night, but
Yeah.
I do want to kind of end with, since you've been able to do so many incredible, amazing things, do you have anything you can tease that's coming up? What can we expect from you next? Because it seems like it gets bigger and better every damn time.
I mean, it's amazing. Ain't It Cool with Harry Knowles? We have these 7 episodes that I got. They're going out to over 73 stations in all 50 states of the United States now. So we have the United States covered. There's a chance that we're going to get some foreign distribution for those episodes. There's a lot of interest by like airlines and other foreign Netflix and other stuff that we hope it works out, but who knows? So there's that, and I think that's really cool. Like I never dreamed that in this first season that it would balloon, but then whoever thought a site called Ain't It Cool, by a guy in Austin, Texas, south of Dallas. I mean, y'all are a more major market. Y'all should have, Harry Knowles should have been here, damn it. We got an Alamo Drafthouse. Why don't you move up here, man? We got better strippers, I mean, come on, there's certain truths about Dallas that I will not deny, but, for me, I've been working with Kerry Conran on a series of things, and he's the guy who did Sky Captain: The World of Tomorrow, and I really, we started working together with Jim Jacks. I recruited him to come off of Sky Captain to join us on John Carter of Mars, and then Paramount kept changing out heads of the studio, and every time they did, we had to change directors because each one of those people had to put their stamp on the project. And I got all 5 directors on that project to commit to the project. And I even got the Burroughs estate to lower their option fee. That's amazing. But I appealed to Danton Burroughs, who was in charge of the estate at the time. And I said, look, you've been wanting to see this movie since 1913, if it goes somewhere else, tick tock, we can make this. Favreau will do it immediately after Iron Man, right? Except that the studio let the rights go, and because they wanted him to do Iron Man 2. Yeah. So they killed our project for that reason. And you look at what happened at Disney, but that's the film. That's the film side. I have a very strong desire to do that. Right now, my number one priority is to get AICN all the way back on its feet financially. The online advertising model has changed radically. We had to, you might see now, we have full takeovers where the margins become the ads and all of that. That's because Apple made an ad blocking software that's going to squeeze all the indie websites out of business unless they incorporate ads into their background of their sites and that sort of stuff, so that everybody sees it no matter what. It's the only way we'll get paid, and I have to do video ads now, which will stay embedded, and it's to be able, because I had to let when Merrick and Beeks, I couldn't afford to pay them anymore. It wasn't a matter of firing, it was a matter of there's no money. I've been getting half checks all this year because I don't want to fire another person. I mean, and there were many months that I took no check at all just so that Jeremy and Glenn, Merrick and Mr. Beeks, could keep writing for the site, because I know the audience wants to hear them. And I've been working so hard to change the ad model, and we've done a really good job. And in about 2 months, we'll start to see the results of that revenue, and we'll be able to maybe hire them back, maybe get some new talent in there, get some people. I'd really like to bring some fresh blood that I could help train with this spirit, right? You have to think about it. Devin Faraci might be one of the most grumpy bloggers in the history of the internet, and he's a great guy. In person, not grumpy, happy. Devin is he feels, to a degree, he has a charmed life. He does. We all do. Any of us that talk about movies and get to interview people, you get to actually meet the people that do the things you like. That's so cool. But he doesn't come off that way online, right?
He picks fights.
He picks fights because he was a Star Trek kid when everybody else turned Star Wars. And he held on to that instead of celebrating it all, right? And there's a lot of that type of geek out there. That's why he's got so many followers. There are people just like him all through. When he wrote with AICN, it was just, he covered one Fantastic Fest. No snark, no cynicism, all happy. Why? He was writing it, ain't it cool? Like, it's the vibe of the place, right? We really try to love this stuff. And now, when we have so many people with so many voices, it's so important that somebody remind people, you're supposed to go to movies to have a good time, to enjoy them, to respect the artistry, to love cinema, right? Now, I see all sorts of movies I don't like, but why would I want to waste my time being negative when there's barely enough time to talk about the stuff I love, right? In France, the critics don't tear films apart. They write positive reviews, or they don't write at all, because why give it free press? Right? That's the point of it. Why be ugly to a bunch of artists that are busting their balls trying to make a movie and a studio ruins it? That's not their fault. Right? Why get mad at the filmmaker? Why get mad at those actors? Because you didn't see the whole of the Fantastic Four. Right? There's 45 minutes of the movie somewhere. What movie can get 45 minutes of the director's cut out? Yeah. It's never wound up good, ever, in the history of cinema. Not once has it ever been good. And to be able to look and peel back the veneer of cinema and shake, that's what I want to do. Like, moving forward, is to continue to give people the idea of the foreplay of cinema, which is everything that leads up until you see it. Right? So if you read something on a website, you read coverage of the stuff, you see the stuff on Entertainment Tonight, you do all that. All of that is about getting you excited to see the movie. Yep. And it's a titillation. I mean, like, come on, man, are you not excited about Monday and the new Star Wars trailer? Does it not make your molecules vibrate a little faster, right? It does me. Like, Monday, I get to buy tickets and see a trailer about 1,000 times, right? Like, I will watch it in reverse. I will watch it forward. I will watch it frame by frame. I am a geek. It's what we do. And I love that. And that's what you will continue to see from me, is real, honest Harry. Right, because for me, it is so cool that we live now. If I were a cripple in any time before this, it would suck. I mean, at home, I have a 9-foot by 12-foot screen where I can see 3D images that big and be 7 feet from it. It's awesome. In total surround sound, and I can do that shit naked, drunk. It's better than anything I ever dreamt of when I was a kid. And I'm married. It's a miracle, Like, it's so cool that we live in this world, right? It's so cool. We got a black president. That's crazy. Crazy stuff. I mean, people are legalizing pot? Really? I never thought that would ever happen anywhere. Not like, well, I mean, maybe California? But they weren't even really first, right? I mean, that's weird. It was like Oregon and Washington State. Like, then the smoke wafted down over California, and they said, hey, that's a good idea, And then it blew and stopped at the Rockies, and that's why Colorado, like, it's the way of the world. I mean, when you start thinking about our world and how it works, and that we're having a serious discussion about colonizing Mars. That's going on right now.
Because of The Martian. That's crazy.
Not because of The Martian. It was happening before The Martian.
Yeah.
Elon Musk has been talking about it.
Yeah.
Anyway, the one thing that everybody can see from me in the future is Harry rambling, but it's been an honor to be on the show with you.
You've heard it from the Buddha of film, the man Harry Knowles. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Awesome.